Good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Hamilton. Thank you for joining us for our Wednesday Suitcase Stories conversation. I am the director of Suitcase Stories, and I am pleased to be here joined by Judith Hertog. But before I introduce her and her background and hear more about her story, let me just tell you a little bit about the International Institute of New England in case you're new to us. We are a nonprofit organization who has been operating in New England for over 100 years. We provide refugee resettlement, English classes, employment services, and legal support. Legal being incredibly important right now. We've actually been expanding our services. This will actually come up in the conversation with Judith, but getting your citizenship is something that we can help people with. And right now, it is more critical than ever that you reach out to us if you're desiring to go through the citizenship process or you know people who are eligible. Because on October 2nd, the fee for applying for citizenship will double. And we know that that's an economic impact. So definitely reach out to the Institute if you're interested in learning more about our legal services. Our fifth service and our fifth program is Suitcase Stories. This is a program we launched 3 years ago to celebrate and honor refugee and stories of refugee and immigrant life told by US and foreign-born residents, because we believe that migration affects all of us. So Judith, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here, thank you.
Where are you tuning in from? We all like to hear these days.
I'm in Vermont.
Is it nice up there? It's beautiful this time of year, right?
It's a beautiful day, yes, today. Yesterday we had a lot of rain.
Terrific. How long have you lived in Vermont?
I lose track of my own life, but it's been about 17 years, I think. No, I'm wrong, 15 years.
15 years. And for those of you that don't know you or haven't had a chance to hear your beautiful story, what is your background and sort of journey to the US?
Well, as I said, I have a hard time keeping track of my own life. It's been very complicated and unplanned. I grew up in Amsterdam. And then when I was 18, my family and I moved to Israel. Mm-hmm. And there I met my husband in university. Mm-hmm. Then we went to graduate school in the US, never intending to immigrate to the US. And we also lived in Asia for a few years.
Wow.
And we intended to go back to Israel, but there was no work. And in the end, my husband ended up getting a job offer in the US. We thought it was going to be temporary. And now we're here 17 years later.
You sound like so many immigrants. That's terrific. You must have many suitcase stories then, so I can hit you up for another one in the future. Now, you are a writer, a teacher, a storyteller. I know right now you're teaching a class with Grub Street, an incredibly popular organization here in Greater Boston that teaches all kinds of writing. What course are you going to be teaching?
I'll be teaching an essay writing course.
Is that your favorite type of writing?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Great. When did you get into storytelling, though? That's how I connected with you. In this case, live storytelling.
I've been telling stories for a few years now. And one reason I got really into storytelling is because as a writer, writing is a very lonely activity. Mm-hmm. And you don't know how your story actually ends up with the reader, how the reader reacts. And what I love about storytelling is just the immediacy of the immediate connection with your audience. And I'm not a natural storyteller. I get stage fright, but I do love that connection with the audience.
Is that sometimes not just the performative element, but is that sometimes more intimidating, knowing that you're minutes away from someone responding to a piece, whereas with a book, they might write you later? Like, how does that feel?
When I write, I forget about readers. I'm alone with my text. I don't even think about who's reading it. And sometimes that's wonderful, but also you don't have that connection. And I think it's really wonderful to just get that immediate reaction to a story.
And have your Suitcase Stories, obviously, is an immigration story. Is this subjects you also write about in your essays and other works?
Quite a lot. I think I often write about home or the concept of home. And in a way, I would even say that maybe my writing is more my home than any physical place.
Oh, that's beautiful. I just noticed that Chris Coe signed on to watch, and Chris Coe performed in the same show that you did in Nashua. He was born in Guatemala. He, like you, spent time in Asia. He traveled. He ended up in New England. And his story also touches about the concept of home. Is it a place? Is it a feeling? What is home? So I'm sorry to ask you the big question, but you led me here. What is home for you then? Like, is it just the writing, or what do you?
It really is. At this point, I don't know anymore what home is.
If you had to then.
My family also.
Sure, absolutely. If you were giving advice to a newly resettled immigrant or refugee, how would you recommend that they take steps to feeling at home, even if home is not a geography? Like what was helpful to you?
I don't even know yet how to answer that question, because at this point in time, I think all of us feel very disoriented, because at this point, my social life is more online than it is in the physical world, which even more messes up my concept of home. Yesterday, I was celebrating a birthday party in Amsterdam with people on Zoom. So that's, I'm talking with my family on WhatsApp all the time. So my mind is very confused. And I think it has really changed the immigrant experience. And in a way, I'm very grateful for technology.
We were talking with Anita Fabos, another storyteller who joined us, I believe, 2 weeks ago. Her family came from Hungary, and she teaches about migration. And she was saying similar things. She was saying that she was always fascinated before the pandemic in how people conceptualize their lives in a time when migration is faster, when people are traveling more, when you're resettling more often, that this idea of home also is not rooted in literally geography anymore. And I think we've just accelerated that through this period. And I'll be very curious to see what people return to afterwards, right? I mean, were you having birthday parties with relatives online before? Is this?
It hadn't occurred to me before. I don't know if it's a good thing, because I mean, the physical world is important, and the connections with real people in your community are important. So I don't want to lose that. And before the pandemic, actually, storytelling was very much a way for me to be part of my community, because I do organize storytelling in my community. I also organize, I try to have monthly just living room story circles at my house, where I invited friends and neighbors and anybody in my community who seemed like someone who wanted to tell a story. And that's actually been a really, really wonderful way for me to connect with people. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to do that, for a few months now.
Some storytellers are telling me, people new, I think newer than you and I to the community, have been saying that they're in love with it, because now they're learning from people in Chicago and Florida, but also at the same time, they didn't get that chance to have those deep one-on-one intimate situations like you and I have. So it's all about trade-off, right? But to hear that you went from someone anxious about telling stories to someone who organizes events, like, how fast did that happen?
I'm still nervous when I tell a story.
We all are, depending on the story. What have you learned about telling stories that either is the same or different from your writing of essays?
One thing I've learned is that everybody has a story, and that often the people say that they're introverts and they're shy often have the best stories.
Yes, they spend more time thinking and digesting and reflecting on them in many ways, I find, which is really a good lesson for me as someone who speaks to think out loud. In terms of crafting the piece, are there things, again, you do differently? And I'm not a writer. In fact, I applied to a writing school, and my application said, I cannot write, help. And so what is the difference for you?
It's a very different process. Writing is, it's much more reflective. When I write an essay, I meander, it's more abstract, more, when you tell a story, you have to stay with the audience. They're going to lose patience if you meander too much.
Well, you tell this unbelievably moving story that was also featured on Risk recently. Risk is a very popular national storytelling organization. Their catch line is, you tell the stories you may not even tell your therapist, but they also talk about people taking risks, standing up for something they believe in. And in your case, you actually kneeled for something you believe in, telling about going to your daughter's gymnastics meet and not standing for the national anthem. Tell us about constructing that piece. Was the first draft radically different than the last, or what did you have to tweak?
Well, actually, when I told the story for Risk, it had a new twist because I told the story for Suitcase Stories. Was that just last fall?
Yeah, it was November.
It was.
Yeah, it was November.
And at that point, I was applying for citizenship.
I was hoping you'd bring this up.
I had already been rejected once. That was a technical issue. But I got approved. And when I told my story for Risk, I had just done my swearing-in ceremony, which happened actually the week as the country was closing down for COVID. I think it was probably the last swearing-in ceremony in the US before everything got locked down in March. So when I told the story at Risk, I had a twist.
Well, then, in either case, how did you approach it? Are you someone that just stands against, faces a wall and just talks out loud? Are you someone that writes down? And what was really important for you to get across in the piece?
Actually, to be honest, I had been working on it as an essay after I told the story at Suitcase Stories. Oh. I started working on it as an essay, but of course, an essay never works as an orally told story. And then when I told it for Risk, well, my twist was that, and also when I actually was developing the story for Risk as I was going through the ceremony.
Okay. That's
They had asked me to tell the story 2 weeks before I took my oath. So I didn't know how it was gonna end up. And it also put pressure, because I think when I told the story for Suitcase Stories, I ended by saying that I was applying for citizenship and I wasn't sure if I was gonna take a knee at the ceremony or not.
You did.
Kind of a joke. And then when I was asked to tell the story for Risk, it was 2 weeks before my ceremony. So that put a lot of pressure on me for the ceremony, because I thought, now I have to take a knee to have a good story.
I was just going to say, so you were drafting a story and deciding if you were going to live it out.
Yes, I was living it.
So tell the audience, what did you do?
I looked it up. I went to the website. I found a manual for USCIS citizenship ceremonies to find out what would happen if I did take a knee. And they allow it. Well, they didn't say anything about taking a knee, but they said there is a clause that says you don't have to stand for the anthem. Until the moment I was there, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. But I figured I didn't want to center myself or cause a disturbance, because that wouldn't have made sense. I mean, this wasn't about me having just a good ending to my story. I mean, I didn't want to disrupt a ceremony for that. So I did not take a knee.
Oh, and we respect either decision. It's funny.
Seated, though.
You likely know storyteller and author Matthew Dix, who wrote Storyworthy. And if you don't, Matthew has this philosophy called homework for life. And every day he says we should end our day by opening our computer screens and writing the one sentence version of the story of the day. Now he does it in part because he wants to chronicle, capture his life, but also he's a competitive storyteller, so it's always new material for him. But I do think about what he says is that we see our lives differently. Once you become a storyteller, you're like looking for them all the time. And in your case, you're writing them and then seeing what happens. Well, congratulations on the citizenship. We actually just received yesterday a photo of our my colleague in Lowell. She works on our legal program, helping in processing green card applications and citizenship. And she sent a photo of a recent swearing-in ceremony, all in masks, all 6 feet from each other. And she said, I had to be there. I wanted to celebrate with her. So what was it like, and why did you decide? Some people make an assumption that all immigrants, their dream is to become an American citizen. How did you come to that decision?
Oh, it was never my dream.
Mm.
The only reason I decided to become well, I've been on a green card for many years, and I wanted to be able to vote.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I was also worried with everything going on in this country that on a green card I wasn't safe. That
understandably,
being a citizen gives me more protection.
Right. Your children were born here? Remind me, I'm sorry.
Well,
what is their citizenship?
My son was born in the US. Mm-hmm. So he's the one in our family who can become president if he wants to.
We'll keep that in mind.
My daughter was born in Taiwan.
Wow.
And she was on a green card till she was 17 or so. Mm-hmm. So she had actually never lived in a country where because she grew up with Dutch and Israeli citizenship. Mm-hmm. She had never lived in a country where she was a citizen until she became a US citizen.
So she has a suitcase story too. You can tell her I'll be calling.
That was actually her college essay application.
Really?
How do you say it? The college application? Yeah. College application essay, yeah, it was about that.
Well, I understand. I mean, you teach at colleges, and you were just telling me that you're actually helping students write college essays. Is that correct?
Yes.
And if someone needs your services, which I'm assuming a lot of people do because they're home alone now, how should they get in touch with you?
Contact me through my website. Okay. Yes,
which is.
I'm also offering classes for high schoolers who are writing. Who are preparing to write their college essay.
Well, my stepson is also doing that, so I'll have him connect with you too. And that's Judith Hertog .com. I will make sure that our production assistant puts that in the comments. Speaking of comments, if anybody's watching out there that has a question for Judith or myself about storytelling, feel free to pose those. We love to hear from our audience. But I want to continue on this thread of your children. I mean, you have this blended immigration story, but in your suitcase stories, you joke about how they're like, "Oh, mom, you're being an immigrant, or you're not being culturally appropriate." How do you navigate that? Like, what does American and American culture look like in your family?
Well, it turned out that some of that may be more my own self-consciousness than my children actually having a problem with me. Because I asked my son, when I was telling the story, I asked him at some point if I'm really embarrassing him. And he said, "Oh, Mom, don't worry about it. That's what parents are supposed to do."
And I think that's universal. I don't think that's just American.
Yes. And I've been so embarrassed by my own parents when I grew up.
Yeah.
I think it's a healthy thing for children to be embarrassed sometimes.
Right. And your daughter, she has this beautiful, she didn't even know, right? At the gymnast event, what's it called? At the, what do you call it?
Yeah, at the competition. The gymnastic meet.
She didn't know originally that you had taken this stance, or again, a knee. And then you told her and she's like, "What?" How does she feel about you telling this story?
She's very private. She doesn't really like it that much.
Well, we can tell her it's your story. You can't tell her story.
Ask for her permission, which she reluctantly gave.
That's actually a good thing to share with people that are interested in storytelling. There are these questions of ethics, like whose stories can we tell and how can we tell them? And the first response, usually from all of us, is that we're not telling someone else's story. We're telling our story as best as we can and our interpretation of the events and what happened. Now, that doesn't mean there are not times not to disguise, for multiple reasons, another person's identity in a story, or check in with them as you do. I tell stories about dating, and I usually check in with the person I dated. um, but how do you navigate these sort of privacy issues, or what do you think about before you include material?
That's very difficult. And it's something I talk about when I teach essay writing also.
Right.
Uh, of course, when you write, it's different because until you publish, you're not harming anyone.
Good point. I hadn't.
Telling a story publicly, well, you don't have to use names.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's sensitive, it's a very difficult issue. I think on a case by case basis, I approach it.
I've also been in a situation where a storyteller's not sure, or I've spoken to someone who believes they're being featured or hears that, I mean, you can't stop someone. That sounds terrible, but you can't. It's a personal decision. And what I remind the person is, it's you. But if you listen to some stories, you will be the only person that will know that's you, or maybe like a very small circle. I think people panic that like everyone's going to figure out that I was this conversation. But I think your approach and mine also is to, really use your gut and think about it and be very honest in your telling that it is your perspective. Like this is your lens. And in fact, humility and even self-deprecation, that's what I do in a lot of my pieces, for better or for worse, is to own where I have faults and own where I probably am wrong, or God, I hope I'm wrong. Like,
yes.
So.
And also the one thing I say when I teach essay writing is never to write a story out of a sense of wanting revenge or out of anger.
Yep.
Because actually, usually the person it reflects badly on is the storyteller or the writer who seems mean. So always write or tell a story with generosity towards the people who feature in the story.
Yeah, I've actually had a couple of people approach me to do Suitcase Stories, and I know they have great stories and I hope to work with them, but they have brought pieces that they've had a bad intercultural experience, or they had a bad experience in another country. And when we listen to the first draft, I say, you sound like you've just stereotyped an entire country of people. I'm interested in that piece if you'll present it as one interaction, or few people, but we can't possibly say that all people from, I don't know, Bangladesh, right? Just because you have one interaction. And that's hard, because I think people are also processing, and we don't have a lot of places in society to spend time talking about these things. And so I'm excited that they want to, but then also want to honor all of our lives. Mm-hmm. So I want to return one more time to this intercultural, immigration family you have. You and I both, I lived for 28 years in Maine. The demographics are very similar to Vermont, predominantly white, a growing immigration population, just like in New Hampshire. But how have you seen communities, both US and foreign-born, make meaningful connections? Like, what do you think really works? Because it's really important right now, particularly in these divided times.
That's a difficult question. You're doing such good work.
Thanks, but you only got 5 minutes. You can do this.
Okay. One thing, first of all, I think is knowledge.
Yeah.
The antidote for stereotyping is learning about other cultures.
Yep.
And not putting people in boxes. So even if you cannot meet others in person, of course, storytelling would be ideal. I would love for everybody to open up their living rooms and invite their neighbors from everywhere and share stories. That's the perfect answer. Yep. But if you don't have that, at least watch foreign movies, read books in translation, and learn about other cultures in all their variety, richness, because a lot of times in this country, immigrants are flattened into stereotypes, and it can be very condescending sometimes, the way immigrants are seen as people who have to be grateful to come to the US, and that's the only role that they're seen in as.
Yes.
Learn about other countries, other people's backgrounds, cooking, everything.
It's interesting. Some people have come to Suitcase Stories, and anybody that comes and will listen, I'm so grateful. And I also appreciate some of the questions or concerns that come up if people attend. And one of them that's been, I don't know if it's a surprise, but it always catches me for a second, is they're like, well, why did you have white immigrants in that show? Or why did you have US born people? I don't get it. And I remind people, because immigrants, again, there is not a singular narrative nor a singular face identity. And I said two things. We need to hear from people from Europe. We need to hear people that were, white but grew up in Argentina, like whatever, right? But also personally, and maybe this is why I'm a little bit more like, we should be telling our stories too as US born people, is because migration affects all of us. But I appreciate people asking, because then I think they think differently. It also helps when they ask me, because I'm curious who they would like to hear from, because they came to hear voices. And so when they tell me, well, I'm curious about X, Y, or Z nationality, I'm like, great, let's find somebody. So I share your desire.
As the judge at my swearing in ceremony said, everybody in this country, this is an immigrant or descends from immigrants unless they're Native American.
Right, of course, right. Part of the storytelling, as everyone knows, is the oldest art form. And it began because people needed to capture and share their families' histories. And that's how we used to do that. And so really, we're just continuing that tradition with Suitcase Stories and all these other programs and what you're doing in your living room. I used to study immigrant integration, and in Australia, they have dinner parties, but they're very facilitated dinner parties, and they have little cards in everyone's seat of questions that are, dialogue starters. And it's the same idea. It's like going deeper than just, what did you do last weekend, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, Judith, I could talk to you forever. But I just really want to thank you for sharing your story. I hope people listen to it. We will put it online. You can also listen to the part 2 with Risk on their podcast that aired only a couple of weeks ago. It's on the website. So
it aired in May.
In May.
No, actually, no.
Time is elusive. It's on the Risk website. But I agree, these virtual calls are great, but I really, really, really look forward to seeing people in person. So hopefully we'll do that soon. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to talk to you.
Great. And again, everybody, if you would like to learn more about Judith, her classes, her teaching, her background, her stories, go to judithhertog.com. Next week, I'd love to invite you back, because Rahmatullah Akka, who I accidentally said was this week, my brain wasn't working last week, he is definitely with us next week. Rahmatullah is from Afghanistan. He's my colleague in Boston. He came to this country on a special immigrant visa because of his work with US organizations abroad. He's a remarkable person. As a teaser, I'll tell you the part of his story that I will never forget, which is that during school break, he went to school in a different part of Afghanistan. It wasn't safe for him to travel to his village, so he would climb his way through the mountains with his fathers for days in hiding so that he could go see his mother. And I feel like right now, with kids separated at home with parents and not being able to go to school, it's like the reverse story. So please tune in, hear Rahmatullah's story, hear about the work he does, and we just appreciate all of your interest in this program. And on a final note, as you can imagine, we are working tirelessly to support our clients right now with emergency food and rent and housing and services. And we've just learned that a private foundation will make a match on any gift given through the month of August up till for a total of $15,000. So if this is a time that you have $20, you can immediately make it 40. If you've got 100, it becomes 200. And all of that goes directly to our services and our clients for assistance. So if you have the capacity, we would welcome your gift, and that would be delivered to you can make that gift online at iine.org. But we mostly thank you for your time today. So have a great afternoon, everybody, and we'll see you next week.